Welcome to this episode of Guide to Brides, the wedding podcast. I am so excited to be joined by Anshika from Eternity, and we're going to be talking all about like various different trends and controversial topics today about weddings. Do you want to introduce yourself?
Thank you so much for having me, firstly. It's so great to be here because we talk about so many of these things offline.
Yes.
And so it's great to actually talk about them online.
Yes, for sure. And for those that don't know, Anshika and we actually speak to each other quite a lot. And we've talked on Zoom almost like monthly, I want to say.
Yeah.
All about wedding trends, all about the different ways the industry is changing from a business perspective and for couples, because you know both of our platforms are for both sides of that, aren't they? So do you want to talk a little bit about what Eternity is for couples?
Absolutely.
And
Absolutely. So Eternity is essentially a two-sided event management CRM. So it's there to help manage weddings for both vendors as well as couples. So we've got a vendor portal where you can manage your inquiries, your clients. You can actually share your documents with them, your payment schedules, and it basically reduces your admin by so much, because the amount of time that we spend writing an email, chasing a payment is just completely ridiculous. So we're really streamlining that process with Eternity. And then on the flip side, we've got the couples portal. So essentially what that does is it allows your couples to have a portal where they can manage their checklist, their budget, their guest list, as well as their suppliers. So everything is done in one place. So we always like to say Eternity is like the digital backbone of the industry when it comes to communicating and managing your events.
See, it's so exciting to see that kind of technological development happening, and I don't think couples will really realise how much work is going on behind the scenes to help streamline their wedding planning, because understandably, when you're wedding planning, you're probably in it for about 2 years, and then you're gone.
You are, and for those 2 years, because it's probably your first time doing it, you don't know what's right, you don't know what's wrong, and there is no right and wrong really, but you don't know what you don't know. And so if you can get that guidance from platforms like Guides for Brides or through ourselves to help facilitate it, it just makes your life so much easier.
For sure. So today we're going to be talking about controversial topics, trends that we're seeing. It's just going to be a bit of a fun episode, a bit of a fun chat.
Absolutely.
Let's get into it. What traditions do you think we're going to see more of this year?
What am I going to see a lot more of? A lot more casual and candid weddings, I think, where people are injecting their personality in them, as opposed to the formalised structure, because we've already seen that coming through, for example, with late night meals. They obviously used to happen before, they've made a bit of a comeback this year, so I think we'll be seeing more of those. I think also just with your your bride and groom not seeing each other before the wedding was a really big thing, but now we're seeing like a first look, a first touch.
I'm seeing that a lot more as well.
First touch.
First touch. See, I don't know whether I like first touch more than I like first look, because it kind of has that tradition of not seeing each other before the wedding, right? But then it still has that like significant emotional appeal.
Being there, because I think that's another thing with weddings. They do become about everyone else. As much as you know that it's just about you and your partner, there is an element of, okay, well, we need to look after everyone else and we need to do the hospitality, especially when it comes to larger weddings. So I guess it doesn't lose that essence of it when you just put in moments for yourself throughout.
Yeah, and I wonder as well if the first look is a bit too American.
I think so. A little bit.
A bit too American for the British audience. No, I reckon as well, the first look does also remove some of the emotional value of that first look at the end of the aisle, which for some couples, especially if you've got like high anxiety levels, and I feel like a lot of Gen Z will be doing this, is that like there's a lot of pressure not only on you as, like, let's go heterosexual couples here, but you as the bride triggering your groom to cry, but then a lot of pressure on the groom to cry.
The amount of videos, like, if my partner does not cry at the end of the act, I'm going to lose it. I'm like, oh, so much pressure.
So much pressure. But then at the same time, I guess if that is the reaction that you're wanting, or you're wanting to follow that tradition, like, how do you manage your hopes on that as well?
It is a really tricky one, especially that, because everyone's putting so much pressure into, like, my wedding has to go exactly this way. I think, are you finding that couples are a lot more strict and stringent on exactly how their day needs to go, and they try and plan it down to the T, when you know there's going to be some hiccups, but they kind of set themselves the wrong expectation now? And I don't know if that's because of social media.
I reckon you're right. I think it is a social media thing, because social media is like, okay, TikTok is very different to Instagram.
Absolutely.
TikTok feels like you don't have to have a professional camera. You can do whatever you want. You can be yourself. You can make mistakes and have that on camera.
Yeah.
Whereas Instagram is very curated and it's like perfection. Yeah. And I think in the wedding industry, we're still very focused on that perfection element. And so Instagram is still king, even though TikTok is up and coming. And I think that has come from social media, that you want it to run to perfection. But I think as well, like, you know, there is a lot of pressure on couples for it to be absolutely perfect. And you plan it because you want it to be like that. You're not necessarily, you're planning out the day, aren't you, to follow a timeline, and you're going to follow exactly what happens, like you planned out everything that exactly happens in that timeline. Yeah. And I think when you get to that point of actually having the day itself, you don't necessarily worry too much because you're in that little bubble and you're really happy, and you're like, a lot of the time you're just brushing everything that goes wrong off, or you probably don't know because your coordinator or your suppliers are managing that for you, or even your maid of honour or your best man, they're all managing all of these problems for you so they don't actually become something that you think about. Whereas I think, you know, you're planning it to perfection, so you try and like mitigate for all of those mistakes.
But I think you've hit the nail on the head there. Well, on your actual wedding day, you're in a bubble, so it's just that anticipation and probably that last month or last few weeks and the run up to the wedding, which are the most stressful, because you're right, on the day everything runs smoothly and you have the best time ever, and right at the start you're not able to kind of anticipate it, and you do leave a lot of room for error, but it's really that last month where then you get into the mode of everything must be going perfectly.
And how do you think like couples should be managing that pressure that they're putting on themselves? Let's face it, you're putting it on yourself. Okay, highly influenced by society expectations. But how do you manage that? How do you avoid yourself having so much pressure?
I think it comes to talking to your friends and family and your partner about feeling that pressure and just opening up the conversation, because I relate it a lot to how couples, aside from the wedding, just react when they are feeling anxious about anything, or like how Gen Z reacts. We're a very open, transparent, love to communicate generation, and I think that's really good, and it needs to translate into the wedding side of things in terms of like, just tell your maid of honour that, by the way, this is my fear, because a lot of the times it's also probably not a rational fear to be having. Like, you know, everyone's like, oh, my fear is that I'm going to trip over on my dress. That's not rational. Like, you know that your dress designer has done a perfect job, and you know that you're walking through a straight kind of level floor in a straight line. So sometimes you just need someone to talk back and rationalise it to you. That's what I'd say. What do you think?
I think I would probably agree with you, but I also think this is where the bridesmaids, maids of honour, wedding party comes into their form. So
this is your job.
This is your job to manage this thing. I've told you this is what I'm worried about, and now I am giving you that responsibility to not have to deal with it. I remember from my best friend's wedding where I was maid of honour, something happened. I'm not going to say what, because she'll watch this video and she will go, what the hell went wrong at my wedding? Anyway, something went wrong. And the coordinator came over and chatted to me, or one of the venue team came over to chat to me. And I said, okay, let's not tell the bride.
You need to be the filter. That is your job as the bridal party or the groom's party, whatever it is. You are the filter, because you know the bride or the groom best, and they know the logistics best. So you really play that important role as a middleman.
Yeah, it's like with her biggest thing was that she wanted everyone to have a great time. So you got in the back of your head, if someone's not having a great time, I'm just going to remove her from that situation, because she's having a great time. So that's all that you care about.
What do you think about, I've seen so many videos of people saying, oh, my bridesmaids are not acting like good bridesmaids, and they're just not doing what they were born to do, and they're not being supportive, and have I made a mistake by making them my bridesmaids?
See, I think this is a really tricky one, because either, the first thing I do, and it might just be me, but it's like a self-reflection thing. So is it, have I communicated what I'm wanting and expecting from my bridesmaids or groomsmen enough? Like, have I given them a clear brief? Let's go to work
so
mode
self-aware.
here. Have I given them a clear... Thank you. It's one of my top qualities. Have I given them a clear brief? Because that is sort of like where you can try and fix the communication part of it, right? But if you feel like you have, that's when the conversation becomes difficult. And I think there is there's room to have open and honest conversations with your bridesmaids. It's tricky, but sometimes you've got to put your big girl pants on and do it, because you're spending a lot of money on this wedding. And if you have communicated your expectations to the people who are supposed to be your best friends, and they're not delivering on that, it might just take a very gentle conversation of, like, I asked you to do X, Y, and Z, and you haven't done it. Is there a problem? Can I help? Like, is there anything you need from me in order to do that? Like, again, I'm making it sound like a job, but it kind of is.
It is.
It kind of is a job to plan a wedding.
Planning's a full-time job. Being a bridesmaid's a full-time job.
Exactly. I mean, what would you say is a good way of dealing with it?
I'd say the same. I think you need to talk to them, because there's no point at the end of the day, the way I see it is, if a bridesmaid has done something to upset you, and if you're not telling them you're the only one getting affected, they're carrying on with their day. They have no idea. They think they're being the best bridesmaid ever, which they probably have the potential to be, because you've chosen them for a reason. So I think you need to communicate it properly, and you need to realise that at the end of the day, this is a really close friendship of yours regardless, and it is a sensitive one. So you don't want it to build up in the process of wedding planning or up until the day, because you don't want to be stood there on your wedding day, have your bridesmaids stood next to you, and you know that one of them's really upset you.
And they might not even be aware of it.
Exactly.
They might not even be aware of it. And that's, I think, the difficult part. Sarah's nodding her head in the background there. Like, she knows. She totally agrees.
What would you say to people who remove their bridesmaids at some point throughout the wedding planning process?
Oh, it's really tricky, isn't it?
Yeah.
It's really tricky.
How do you just take that position away from someone? / do you do it?
Well, I would lean on if they've done something horrific and it's really upset you, and you know it's going to affect you throughout the whole day, absolutely yes.
Yeah.
Don't worry. Like, they have hurt you and your feelings, potentially, so you probably need to remove them from that situation and from that opportunity. I don't know. But no.
That's not what we're here for.
That's not what we're here for. But remove them. Whereas, actually, if they've done something very minor, or you don't feel like they've been that supportive, I think having a gentle conversation or a very open and honest conversation actually will resolve the problem quite quickly.
And also just position it as, you know what, I'm feeling overwhelmed. Like, you don't even have to be accusatory to say you're not doing this, this and this. You can say, well, actually, I'm feeling this way, and I just wanted to share it with you because you're my bridesmaid, you're one of my closest friends, and they've probably been there for you at different moments of your life, and this is just one of them. But I think with a wedding comes so much more heightened emotion, because you've got emotional pressure, financial pressures, family pressures. There's so many different people involved, and then there's just that pressure of, oh, it's meant to be the happiest day of your life, which it absolutely will be, just as long as you're able to be open and honest.
Yeah, and I think as well, you've definitely hit the nail on the head there about there being so much pressure from all different angles on you. I mean, do you think we're putting too much pressure on couples? And I mean, generally as a society.
100%.
Really?
100%. Because it is a lot. You think about it, and there's so much pressure to spend a certain amount. There's so much pressure to invite people. I know that people get more stressed around the actual budget and the guest list. I saw this quote where someone said recently, planning a wedding isn't hard. It's everything else around it. It's the stakeholder management.
And do you know what? It's the fact that people change when it comes to a wedding.
They do. But I think the bride and groom and the couple themselves perhaps change a lot as well. So it's not just people around you change because perhaps you're in a different phase of your life, especially if your friends haven't got married yet. If you have friends going through it at the same time, or if they've already been through it, they're a lot more mindful. And I think it's always the hardest for the first one in a friendship group to be the one getting married, because no one else understands the immense amounts of pressure that you have.
Yeah, I would totally agree with you. And I think, like, you know, when you've had that first person in the friendship group go through that, you then suddenly realise everyone's learning from your mistakes.
Pretty much. And you just have so much more sympathy for that person.
You're like, oh, I really shouldn't have called her a bridezilla.
You're like, I get it now. My sister had that because she was the first one to get married. And thereafter, for each of her friends, she was just so much more mindful of everything. Like, especially when it came to hen planning, she was like, okay, well, I don't want to put more pressure or strain on you, and I'm not going to ask too many questions unless they're like absolutely necessary. So I'm just not going to make your life more difficult because I know you've got a lot going on. There's definitely times during her hen planning, and she won't mind me saying, where like sometimes you would just hear friends say certain things or ask certain questions, and you'd be like, that's just not very mindful. So what wedding traditions do you think are in and out?
I can think of one immediately that's out. The garter toss and the bouquet toss.
Yeah.
I think bouquet toss, not because, well, garter toss, let's be honest, no one really likes it anymore. Symbolism's a bit...
Little bit awkward.
No, not gonna be doing that in front of my mum.
Done a lot in America.
Yes, and that's what I find so strange.
Yeah.
The whole symbolism behind it makes me... but the bouquet toss, I think a lot of people still want to do.
Yeah.
Because it's not as awkward.
Yeah.
It still has a very similar meaning to it. Well, not really, but it has a sort of similar meaning in terms of in terms of who's next going to get married and isolating out the single women in the group.
Yeah.
But I also think it's out because people spend so much money on their wedding flowers and their bouquets. Like, my God, 150 quid on a bouquet of flowers, and you don't want to throw it. You don't want to throw that.
Absolutely not. You're seeing so many more amazing businesses that are coming about that do floral preservation, and I love that idea because you get to keep those moments, and your bouquet is one of them. Because I remember for my sisters when we did her bouquet toss, it was completely ruined and there was no way we could preserve that. And also I think after that we just lost it, which is so unfortunate.
And I mean, you could do the bouquet toss with a bridesmaid's bouquet, like a smaller one or a posy bouquet. Maybe you can have if you're desperately wanting to do that, you could have your florist create a very small one for you to toss with the flowers that are in your bouquet. Maybe there's like 2 or 3 blooms that are left.
Yes.
They could just pull that together for you purely for the bouquet toss. It wouldn't cost you much more money. But also, it's just awkward. It's just awkward. The whole symbolism behind both of those, the garter toss especially, is just a bit but they're both a bit symbolism-wise outdated.
A little bit, but for example, I would say that the equivalent of the bouquet toss in Asian weddings is, you've got the, this is possibly more so the case for Punjabi weddings, where you've got the red bangles, which is called the chura, and then you've got something called galeria, which hang below it. And the tradition is that you're meant to get everyone who's single lined up in front of you, and they usually sit on their knees, and then you go behind them and you kind of shake and kind of clap your hands together. And if it falls off, then that's the significance of, okay, you're next in line. I don't see that one going away, and I actually love that tradition because it's not, you're still paying for the chura, but then after that, it's an element of it that falls off. It's not the entire thing. So it still preserves the actual beauty of it, and it's still part of your day. So if you want to preserve it and put it in a frame or a box, you still can, because it's metal. It's not like a fresh flower or anything. And I don't see that one going anywhere, and I actually really love that tradition.
And do you think that there are any newer traditions coming in for Asian weddings, or do you think that it's all of the original symbolism and traditions are very much here to stay?
I think it's the originals that are here to stay, but kind of get merged a little bit to be a little bit more modern or a little bit more fusion, especially with the rise of fusion weddings.
Yes,
right?
There's so many more fusion weddings happening. I mean, it makes a lot of sense, doesn't it? If you look at the fact that, we're on potentially 3rd, 4th generation immigrants coming in, and, the diaspora is spreading itself out so much more. It does make a lot of sense that there's a mixture of cultures and religions.
And I love
happening.
it. I love seeing how, because then it really truly does make every single wedding unique, because you know that you can have 2 people of different cultures, but even if you have 2 separate weddings, they're going to look completely different because of the way that someone's interpreted the cultures. So I think instead of, in the multicultural side, I'm seeing a lot more of people who are understanding the tradition a little bit more and trying to see if it aligns with their values, and if it does, then they do it, and if it doesn't, then they're not going to do it. But I'm not seeing them kind of bring out new traditions per se.
Do you think in the future, actually, now that we're talking about this, that because we are seeing more fusion weddings, that the different traditions in different cultures might actually merge or might mesh together?
Absolutely. So we did a survey where we found that only 28% of the couples that we surveyed are from the same religion and the same culture.
Interesting.
So there's a lot of different cultures and different religions being involved in every wedding, because even if you think about it, you could have a couple who has come from a mixed background, both sides. So that's 4 cultures that are already coming through into this couple's wedding. And also because there's such a beautiful touch on personalisation nowadays in weddings, and couples really wanting to make it their own wedding as opposed to like a cookie cutter approach, it really means that they want to incorporate all of those 4 different elements into their wedding, which I think is so stunning. And
do you think as well, like when it comes to the practicalities of that, I think like when I look at the different traditions across cultures. There are certain traditions and certain things that are done that have the same meaning, but maybe done in different ways.
Yes.
So I think it could be quite easy for certain traditions to be merged. I mean, we've just talked about like the bouquet toss, and versus what was it called again? Sorry,
the bouquet toss is called the kalire. So it's that ceremony. Nice. So absolutely, because any culture and any religion, you're right, they do have similar elements, because the wedding has always been about union and coming together. And so I think traditionally they've all probably back in the day historically, and I wish there were stats on this, they've all probably come from understanding how other cultures have done them and then making it their own as part of their own traditions. So I definitely think that we're going to see a lot more of that. And then you're right, couples will be choosing, well, actually, for this aspect of the ceremony and for this significance, we can take it from your culture, and then for this next one, we can take it from my culture. And that's how every wedding is just going to look so unique and different nowadays.
And on the topic of traditions, I think there's a lot that could be said about how the food that is served at weddings might change in the future.
So much. I think you're definitely going to see a lot more different cuisines involved, or perhaps the breakfast will be from one culture and then the lunch will be from another culture. And so I think it's a really interesting space for venues and caterers in particular, because they're definitely going to have to move with the times and start offering a different continental range.
I think that's so interesting as well, because as you just said, there were potentially couples that are bringing in 4 different cultures or religious elements into their wedding. And so, you know, you could have a wedding where you're having Sri Lankan food and then traditional British as well as Italian or Greek or something like that.
Oh, I'd love that. That would sound great.
You know what? I would be at that wedding in an instant. All of them sound fantastic. But it's when you look at it from that perspective, there's so much room for creativity now.
So much.
And I think personalisation is so important for couples as well. And I think like around that sphere, couples have so much breadth for creativity. And I mean, I'd quite like to hear have you heard of any sort of really exciting and interesting things that have happened at weddings?
Anything that's like super unique?
Yeah.
One that I heard of recently, which I absolutely loved, and I can't remember which 2 cultures they were, but they basically had a plate breaking ceremony one night, and I can't remember which culture it is, but one of them is very significant, where your friends and family are meant to come together and they're meant to break the plates, and you as a couple are meant to come together and sweep it up, and it shows the teamwork, and it signifies how in marriage you're going to have some problems, but then you work through it together. And it's really fun, because then you have friends who kind of hide extra plates in their car, and then as soon as you're done sweeping up, they come again. So they'd done that on one night, and then the next night it was an Asian wedding, so then they had the Mehndi and Sangeet ceremony. But it's so beautiful for all of your guests to actually experience both cultures. But I think one thing I would say that I love seeing is when you mix up different traditions but also explain the significance behind them.
Yes, and I think this is so important, especially if you are mixing cultures or mixing like different religions within your celebration. Because, you know, I myself have never been to a Jewish wedding before, so it would be really great if I was a guest at a Jewish wedding to understand what the different significance was for each of those cultures. I know I've seen some couples have put together like a guidebook for their guests, like, you know how like instead of order of service, for example, they might have the order of service in like the front, but then they'll have like explanations of like, or this word, like a word, and then sort of an explanation of what that word means. And I think that's really clever.
I saw one the other day, which was it was like a popcorn box, so it had 4 sides to it, and so you had a little snack for your guests because they could have the popcorn, during the ceremony.
Fab.
Yeah, and then one side had the order of the day. The next one had the significance, then the next one had a picture of the couple, and then the last one just had like things you could do throughout the day in the venue. And I thought that was so stunning, because it's purposeful and it's practical, because you're giving out food and you want snacks.
And who doesn't love a snack?
Exactly. I think snacks on the seats at weddings are great. They're wonderful. But then equally it got across the significance, and it keeps your guests engaged, because I know, for example, a registry ceremony is a lot shorter than a traditional, say, South Asian ceremony, which takes place, which some of them last hours. And so you want your guests to be engaged throughout the ceremony as much as possible, but they can only do that if they understand what's going on.
Yeah, and I totally agree with you on that one. I think where you've got to consider your guest experience, and especially if they're not used to or knowledgeable about what they're walking into, it's really helpful for them to know what to expect. Just as like, for example, if you were expecting a certain dress code, like communicate it with the guests. So that's probably one of the biggest pieces of advice. I'm sure you share that. In order to make sure that not only do your guests feel comfortable, but they are engaged with everything.
Well, actually, where you've brought up dress codes, what do you think about giving your guests a mood board for your dress code before the event?
See, I find this really interesting. So I went to an event and it was an industry event. And we were given a dress code and it was like quite a cryptic dress code. And I was like, it sounded fun, but I was like, I could interpret it in three different ways.
And I could rock up looking completely different and like standing out like a sore thumb.
Exactly. Then the team, a couple of weeks later, they must have got feedback from everyone because they then sent across mood boards, and that was where it was so much more helpful. I think that it is a good idea if you're wanting to achieve a specific aesthetic. I think it is French weddings where you're encouraged to wear the same colour or like fit the colour scheme of the wedding as a guest because it looks great in photos. I think it is French weddings. So I'm surprised that hasn't come over here. Because I think it is quite a common thing out there. I might have to fact check that.
Do you think it's overly particular and controlling?
I think it's so tricky because you know what, there's always going to be one person that's like, why are they going to tell me what to wear? I don't have to do that.
But also it's the practical side of, okay, should I buy a whole new outfit for this? And that's probably not sensible either, because as a guest, say for example, if you've got friends who are getting married, 5 or 6 friends getting married in the same year, and if they've all got these different dress codes and you're getting these different mood boards, if you then dress differently, knowing what the mood board is going to be, that's probably a little bit worse, as opposed to just saying, oh, I misinterpreted the dress code.
Yes, exactly. And I think like the mood board idea is great if you are really trying to achieve a certain look. However, I think using language that most guests understand. So like if it is a colour code or colour coordination, saying pink encouraged or black and white wedding, please dress accordingly. Then people are going to understand what that means. Or please wear black. Like that's easy.
As opposed to evening sunset chic.
Oh yeah, exactly. Or like, winter wonderland. And you're like, do you want me to dress up as an elf?
What's the purpose we're trying to achieve here? Absolutely, because I think as a couple you get so carried away with this is the aesthetic I want, and that is absolutely perfect, but you have to realise that not everyone else is in this wedding bubble that you're in, and so you just need to put it in layman terms for everyone else. And I think like there's also nothing wrong if that is exactly what you're wanting to achieve, but then I think you've probably also got to expect that, as you say, your guests are going to have to spend money potentially in order to fit that dress code. So how are you going to mitigate that pressure off them? Is it that you then say that you're not expecting a gift, or you don't request anything expensive on your gift list or something like that, so that they then don't feel like they're forking out 50 quid on a new dress and then another 50 quid on your present when they could have got something in the back of their wardrobe that, you know, they don't necessarily, they could have worn again. Yeah, and where you said gifts there, it's so interesting because I think traditional weddings have always had gift registries. Cultural weddings, a lot of the time they don't. You kind of just get an envelope of money given to you. I remember my cousin did do a gift registry, but hers was a charity gift registry. And I remember a family member saying, oh yeah, so we'll contribute to that. And then another family member was like, no, like we don't do that. That's just for everyone else. Like we're family. We have to chip in with money and actually give them cash. And so it's just so interesting to see how across different cultures the gifting norms are so different.
Yeah, and I think it's very also like in the UK. I think people are very nervous about asking for any kind of gift. Whereas in America, like gift lists.
Here's my gift registry.
Everything if you can't come to the wedding, I'm still expecting a gift. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. A little handwritten note. Perfect.
So I think we can lean into something slightly more controversial. Who pays for the wedding? And this really varies between different cultures, doesn't it? we surveyed couples back in 2023, and at the time, and I can't imagine it's changed that much since then, but 48% of the couples we surveyed said that they were receiving financial contributions from their parents in order to pay for the wedding. That doesn't necessarily mean the parents are paying for everything, but it meant that they had some involvement
through
in
a
it.
gift or like a birthday gift. Yeah, I'm not surprised by that stat at all, to be honest. And you're right, I think culturally it changes so much, because if I look at, for example, the Asian culture, traditionally it's always the parents paying and the parents making the decisions as well back in the day, because I split it up with, you've got the financial authority and then the decision-making autonomy to who is actually planning the wedding at the end of the day. So I think traditionally in the Asian side, it was always parents paying, parents making decisions, whereas now you have an element of parents and the couple paying and the couple mainly making all of the decisions.
Do you think more, especially in sort of the Asian culture, more couples are paying for their own wedding themselves, or is it still very much that we're leaning on mum and dad?
It's still very much leaning on mum and dad, I think. And I don't know if that comes down to traditionally, and things have changed a lot in recent years, but traditionally Asian couples are known for getting married a lot younger, or being in your early 20s, for example. And by that point, you just don't have the savings for the expectations of a 400-person guest list.
This economy, like, who can blame you?
Exactly that. And especially when you know that you've got a very large guest list size and you've got a lot of family expectations. And I know it's to the extent where sometimes parents will spend their whole lives having a separate saving pot for their kids' weddings on the Asian side. But equally, sometimes they'll take out loans, because traditionally it's just a wedding is such a significant part of someone's life. But I think that is very different coming back to now having a lot more fusion weddings. I'm definitely seeing that as a very big rift of, say, you've got one side where parents are contributing and then the couple's contributing, and then you've got another partner who perhaps parents aren't contributing because it's not as culturally significant for them, and it can cause a bit of difficulty, right?
Yeah, and I think it's the thing you want to avoid, especially when you're mixing the cultures as well, is having one set of parents be annoyed by the other set of parents.
Oh gosh, that's
my
worst.
Yeah, it's terrifying. Yeah. You want everyone to be getting along.
Happy families, like, we're all in this together.
We're all in this together. We're planning this wonderful occasion. Yeah. But then at the same time, you kind of get it. Like, you've grown, like, your parents would have grown up with different rules.
Absolutely.
To your partner's parents.
Absolutely, and it comes also down to, like, the family sizes, for example. Like, knowing that one partner may have a larger family and a larger guest list to another one, sometimes that puts a lot of strain on the couple themselves, feeling a little bit awkward to say, okay, well, actually, should I cut down my guest list? Because you don't want to increase both sides to be the same 400 amount. But then equally, maybe someone will cut their guest list and then upset people, which again puts a lot of pressure on the family. So I have a lot of empathy for those who plan fusion weddings, because as much as it's so beautiful to mix cultures together, it's also a logistical nightmare at times.
And that must be so hard to manage in terms of expectations. It's not even just the logistics side of it, it's the fact that, you know, you've probably still got grandma in your ear saying like, no, the wedding must happen on a Saturday and it must do this and it must do that.
And then you say, well, actually it's 10 grand more expensive to do it on a Saturday. Where's that coming from?
Yeah, are you going to pay for it now?
Yeah. With all due respect, that's just not practical at all. No, absolutely, and you're right that there's a lot of times when you'll be planning a wedding, and if there is a lot of cultural significance and families wanting to do things a certain way, sometimes you get the couple turning around and say, well, actually, why are we doing it like this? Yeah. And the family, they can't say anything other than, well, that's just the way it's done. And I think that's the worst thing to hear as a couple. But then equally, you want to have that respect for your parents, because it's such a significant day in their lives as well as yours.
And that's the thing, I think, like, all of the focus today is around the couple and how the couple feels. And that should be exactly as it is. Yeah. But from a parent's point of view, they've been waiting for this day for your whole life. They've been imagining what would happen at your wedding, and they've been envisioning how your wedding would look and who you would marry and who would be standing next to you in your ceremony. Yeah. And if that person, without sort of, I'm going to have to phrase this very carefully, but if that person doesn't fit the original vision that they had, there's going to be some adjustments.
Absolutely.
That
There's
they
a lot
have
of
to
compromise.
yeah, exactly. It doesn't necessarily mean they don't like your partner, but it might be more around, okay, so she's marrying someone from a different religious background, which means that we're not going to have every single religious tradition that we thought she was going to have. And then that is a difficult pill to swallow, I think, for people. And you've got to have a bit of empathy there, even though you want to be like, come on,
let's get moving. No, but it's so true. And I think especially when it comes down, one thing that I always think of when it comes to fusion weddings, and just any weddings for that matter, is that you don't want to ruin or tarnish the relationships that are so important to you, like your friends and your family, specifically your parents and your in-laws, in the lead up of that planning process. Because as soon as that wedding's done, the wedding's done, but someone's always going to remember that actually you said this and I didn't really like that, or this didn't sit well with me and I felt disrespected here. And so wedding planning is temporary, but your relationships are permanent, and that's really important to uphold. Nikita, what do you think about having kids at weddings?
Oh, it's a love-hate relationship. I really...
Depends on who the kid is.
Yes, I think that is one crucial element to consider, is who is the child that is on the guest list? What is their relationship to you? Is it significant for them to be there for whatever reason? And I think sometimes that makes the decision for the couple. Like, for example, if you've got a niece and nephew and you're like, I really want them to be involved in the wedding ceremony, I've always envisioned them to be involved in the wedding ceremony, they might be the only kids you invite to the wedding. But, you know, having their involvement might be very important to you. However, I think, you know, as much as we say, like, society is changing and people are having kids before they get married and things like that, when they're not your own familial relationships or your own children, I think if you've not got children, you are going to be less inclined to allow many children at your wedding. And I think that's a general thing across the board. But my opinion is, if they're not a direct familial relationship, I don't want them there. Because kids at weddings are lovely. They have the most, you can get the funniest moments at weddings from kids.
The most adorable moments.
But they're also a liability, let's be honest.
The last thing you want is a kid just crying in the back of your ceremony and you just don't know who that kid is.
Exactly. And I think, like, it's very, very different if one of your friends, like a newborn, for example, and it's a friend who you really want to be at your wedding, you're not going to be able to separate mother and baby. Like, it's just not practical. But if you are able to have a conversation with that friend and say, like, we really want you there, do you mind just being at the back or having an aisle seat, so that if anything does happen, it's an easy escape for you to just, so that the rest of the congregation can enjoy
that makes sense.
Ceremony.
I have a really different view on this, and I've always envisioned this, where I actually like the thought of having kids at a wedding. I don't know if it comes down to a cultural thing. I just love people at the wedding, like, especially if it's people you know. Like, I'm definitely not one to just invite anyone and everyone, but when it comes to family and friends, I think I'll be quite selective on making sure that I know everyone who's there. But equally, if you've got children, the chances are I've probably met them, and I probably do love them, because otherwise you wouldn't be invited to my wedding. So I think I'm pretty clear there. I love the idea of having a mini nursery at my wedding.
Interesting. And yes, I've seen some of these before as well. They look really, really cool, because you can make them like so creative.
You can make them so creative, and then you know that there's someone who's going to be looking after the children, and so your mum, dad, anyone else can just enjoy the actual wedding and be as present as they need to. But then you can have the kids there for whichever element they need to be there for, and then after that they've got their own room. They can all enjoy amongst themselves, and they're not going to be running around the dance floor and you're scared that they're going to topple over the cake, because they're just segregated off somewhere else. But I also think the same, because I always wanted my dog at my wedding. So I've always said that, right, I need someone who's going to look after my dog and someone who's going to look after the kids, and they're all just going to be in one room having the time of their lives while we're in another room.
Kids and pups in one room.
Exactly. What a great solution and a great divide. But it's all of those things that until you get to planning it, you have these views and opinions, and then when you're in the mode, you're actually a bit like, okay, well, is this practical? So wish list, but...
I think it's interesting that you say that, though, because, you know, what I'm hearing, yes, you want them there, but then also they get separated at some point.
You don't be there. Well, because kids can get cranky, right? And then I don't mind your child throwing a fit in the middle of my dance floor as much, but what I do mind is then that's my friend who's not going to be enjoying the wedding, and that's what I care more about. And it goes back to making sure that my wedding is a place where everyone's going to be having the best time, how you were saying about your best friend, you just want everyone to enjoy themselves. And if they're going to enjoy themselves by having their child in close proximity, not at home with a babysitter for a really long time, then it makes sense for me to have them in the same room where you can keep dipping in and out, but you know that they're not your responsibility the entire night, so you can kind of let loose.
And I think when you get to the age that you know we are, where you start, your friends are starting to get married, and some of them are starting to have babies, and some of them are not. Some of them are totally single, and it just becomes like this weird mix of like different life phases. You've got to be ready to be flexible for those people that you want to be at the wedding, because those friends who, you know, might have to hire a babysitter, or, you know, request that the grandmother or grandfather looks after the child for the day of the wedding, or picks them up for the evening before the evening reception starts. You've got to be mindful of the fact that that is extra cost, it's extra logistics for them, but also they probably haven't had enough time to think about how they're going to do that, considering the fact that when you're probably organising your wedding initially, they'll have a good 12, 18 months notice, generally speaking.
But if you girl math it, and I love using girl math at weddings, if you girl math it, the cost that all of your friends are going to have to hold on getting their own babysitters, individual babysitters, versus the one that you'll have by hiring that one babysitter, I think it makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, I think so as well. But that it makes a great point, because, and they can be so creative as well. I've seen, I think they're called creches. So the creche has got like little teepees, and all of the kids have like they're going to a slumber party almost, and you know, by the time it gets to 8 p.m, they're all watching a movie in their pajamas, and they're having a little like dance party in the room, and or something like that, while the parents are off getting drunk and enjoying themselves. But that works really well, because they're looked after. If they want to sleep, they can sleep. If they don't want to, that's fine. But I think I like how you put it there, is that, you know, your friends that have got kids, or your family members that have got kids, will be able to enjoy it, and it actually then outweighs the cost of that element. So.
Absolutely.